This is Chris from Play Comics, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 291, Brewster's Millions Movie Review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Now this week it was over to Derek to nominate a movie for us to watch and review. So Derek, you normally focus on the newer stuff, but this week you decided to go back into my territory, my friend, all the way back to 1985. So we're going to be reviewing the Richard Pryor comedy Brewster's Millions, right in my wheelhouse, so this ought to be fun. But before we get to it, Derek, anything new in the world of pop culture for you?
So yes and no. Now that we are getting into the nice weather here in Canada, I have been spending more time outside. I have been spending more time in my beautiful swimming pool, and so I have not nearly had as much time to consume television, movies, and that kind of thing as we often do. The only thing that I have been able to do is I'm starting to get caught up on some podcasts. Oh, okay. So I find when the weather's nice like this, I tend to go outside and ride on my bike, most days, and I want to have something in my ear, and sometimes it's music, but I do find that from time to time I want to listen to podcasts. So this past week anyway, I've had a chance to start catching up on some podcasts that I enjoy, but maybe haven't been keeping on top of. And so I just want to give a shout out to a couple of friends of ours. So first one I want to mention is Cinema 9 podcast, our good friend Michael Govier, who's been on our show a few times. He is one of the cast over there at Cinema 9. They do great work. I've actually appeared on a couple of shows, and they put out an episode caught my eye a couple of weeks back. They reviewed the movie Leon, the Professional, which we did on our show not too long ago, well, probably about a year ago. And so it was interesting. I always find when another podcast reviews a movie that I really enjoy, I like to hear what other people's takes are. So I really enjoyed that one. And then I had a chance to go back and listen through a few other ones I had already saved up on my phone. So again, if you're not already listening to Cinema 9 podcast, I'd recommend it. They do some good work over there. And then the other one I want to mention is a buddy of mine that I play Dungeons & Dragons with. He's got a series of podcasts that he's been putting out for 6 months to a year, and I regret to admit I only just started getting caught up in the last couple of weeks. And his feed is called Red Rooster's Gaming Coop, and he does 2 shows a week, one about video games and one about role-playing games. So if you're into those things and you're looking for something new, give it a listen. It's called Red Rooster's Gaming Coop. And again, the show, I find, because it's just the one guy, it's a little bit more challenging to listen to. Personally, for me, I like more of a banter between a couple of people, but he really knows his stuff. Craig, who is the host, is very knowledgeable. He does his homework. I've been listening to a bunch of his I'm not a video game guy, so I've been listening to the role-playing game ones, mostly about like Dungeons & Dragons and stuff. And oh my God, like, talk about an encyclopedic knowledge of some of these things. He's clearly, wants to make sure that when he's talking about something, he knows what he's talking about. A lot better than I talk about stuff on our podcast all the time, and I usually fly by the seat of my pants. Yeah. No, he really knows his stuff. So if you're into video games, you're into role-playing games, you're looking for something to listen to, if you're not already listening to Red Rooster's Gaming Coop, give him a check, give him a chance. I think you might be pleasantly surprised.
Nice. Couple of great podcasts. You mentioned that the weather has gotten nicer up here in Canada. It certainly has. And so for me, that means it's trailer season again. So that means it's time for me to bust out my DVD collection and watch old movies at night when the kids go to sleep, So recently I mentioned here on the podcast, I found some old classics on eBay. I think I mentioned this a few weeks back. So I busted out one of my purchases. This weekend, I watched the 1982 comedy Young Doctors in Love. This is one of the lesser known films from the 80s. I don't think a ton of people have seen it. I would love to be able to review it here on the podcast, but I just don't think anyone has seen it. And you can't.
Who's in the cast, Chris? Because I've heard of it because you've mentioned it before. But
It's Michael McKean and Sean Young and Dabney Coleman is in it, and Saul Rubinek, and like it's a great cast, like a fantastic cast, and it also includes in it one guy that absolutely steals the show, and that's Hector Elizondo. So I don't know if you know him or not.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He is just phenomenal. In anything he does, he's good. But in this, he is just so good. And I kind of almost forgot about him being in this. So for anyone that has actually seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. Like, the whole movie's funny, but Hector Elizondo just steals the show. So he plays this like tough, grizzled gangster, and he's got to go in disguise as a woman so he can go to the hospital to watch over his mob boss father, who's in the ward, right? The thing is, though, he looks nothing like a woman. Like, he just wears this same sort of black funeral dress in every scene, and he just sticks a blonde wig on, and he's got this hat. He's got like a 5 o'clock shadow, and the thing is, he curses nonstop. And so, of course, this sort of naive young doctor falls in love with him, thinking that he's a woman. And some of the scenes, I was just laughing so much. So I'm just looking at the producer behind the glass here, because there's going to be some censor peeps. So a couple of my favorite things from this movie. So at one point, the doctor that is like falling in love with him is like, "Hey, do you play a musical instrument?" And Hector's like, "I play the guitar." And the doctor's like, "Is that a special kind of guitar?" He's like, no, it's just regular. And then he's getting interviewed by the local TV station outside the hospital. There's like a nurses' strike going on. And so they're asking him his opinion, right? And he's like, "Oh, I don't really know much about it," and this and that. And then all of a sudden, right in the middle of the question, he's like, hey, get off my car. And the reporter's like, oh my, she's covering up the microphone. He's like, "There's a on my car. He's sitting on my car. Hey, I'm going to beat the shit out of you." and then there's a scene where the doctor takes him to a party, and he just walks in the door, and he's like, "Oh, I knew it. I'm f***ing overdressed." And then he's at the party, and they sit down on the couch. This topless girl sits down on the couch, and he turns to the doctor, and he's like, "Did you see those?" And the doctor's like, "Well, I'm sorry, you must be so embarrassed. I'll sit in the way so you don't have to look at her." And he just shoves the doctor back against the couch. And then he's visiting his doctor, or the father, and the doctor's like, "Were you close with your father as a child?" And he's like, "Well, there was a track and there was Vegas, but like f***ing park or movie, like f***ing forget it." And the thing is, the doctor doesn't see any of this stuff. Like, he just thinks it's a woman, right? So, but like I say, Hector Elizondo steals the whole movie. Like I say, it's got a great cast in it. Oh, like, I think like one of the best movie casts ever. Like, every actor in it is just perfectly cast. So anyway, that's how I spent my weekend at the trailer. I laughed so much I thought the neighbors were gonna like file a noise complaint against me. It was so good. Oh my god. I did spend some time with my wife and kids too, but because I am a good dad, because I do these things like this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, why should you never throw sodium chloride at other people?
I have no idea. Why not?
Because that's assault.
I think you're going to be assaulted if you keep telling those jokes.
This is a little more Chris's documentaries than Derek's documentaries.
Was I in it? Did they feature me in it?
I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, and I don't normally talk about things I haven't seen.
Did they go like local celebrities or something like that?
Well, I think it's going to be kind of laughably bad.
Have you seen my old TV show? That was as old school as you can get.
I'm not really holding out hope that it's going to be awesome.
Good luck on that one.
If I really want to understand Chris and who he is, I need to watch this documentary.
If you really want to understand me, go back and watch like WKRP in Cincinnati. All right, Derek, like I mentioned, it was over to you this week, and you picked Brewster's Millions. from 1985. A little bit of a departure for you. You're going back in time. So you got to pick any movie that you wanted. Why this one?
So, as I mentioned 5 minutes ago, I don't always do as much homework for this podcast as I should. I'll admit it. I don't. I'm sorry. The veil of professionalism has been pulled back. And so when we were doing the show last week, I realized while we were recording that it was going to be my turn to pick a movie. And so I'm racing in my brain while we're doing the show. What can we watch? And I thought, I'm going to make this easy on myself. I fired up my digital recorder and it said, you have 102 movies saved. And I'm like, okay, I'm finding something on this list. I'm finding something on this list and we are watching it together and we're going to do it for the podcast. And I'm cycling through and I there's a lot of stuff on there that I'm interested in, but not necessarily things that make for, good podcasting. So, and then I hit Brewster's Millions and I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen this movie in 10 years, 15 years. I don't know. Maybe I've seen it more recently, but I just didn't remember it. Anyway, obviously I recorded it because I wanted to watch it again. And I thought, let's revisit this. I know how much you love the 80s movies.
I do.
I don't think and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've done any Richard Pryor movies on this podcast, have we? Did we do Stir Crazy
Nope, not yet. Not yet.
Okay. I think we had talked about doing Stir Crazy more than once. You and I talked about it.
I've mentioned Stir Crazy on the show because I watched it not that long ago. So, and
I watched Car Wash in the last year, and I know I talked about that. There's a couple other ones that I think we've sort of mentioned in passing, but I was like, when I saw the Brewster's Millions on my list of movies, I thought this will give us a chance to talk a little bit about Richard Pryor. I totally forgot John Candy was in it until I started watching it. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, he's the friend. And so, I was like, okay. And I thought it would just be an interesting discussion because, of course, this is a movie where the guy's given an ultimatum. He's given a chance to, you can take the wimp clause and the little bit of money, or you can go for the gusto and try and get the big prize, which essentially is like gambling, which, you and I have been known to gamble from time to time. So I thought that might be a little more up our alley than we might at first anticipate. And so I wanted to go back and revisit it. And I'm very glad that I did because I actually really enjoyed it a lot on the rewatch. And a lot of the sort of the broader themes and topics really spoke to me on this watch through. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that as we go into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me too. I probably hadn't seen it since early 90s, late 80s, early 90s for sure. It's been a long time. And so I actually enjoyed watching it again too. But I think on a different level because I think, and we'll get into this a bit more later, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. I just remembered it as being a comedy, but I actually got a little bit more out of it this time. I thought there was a little bit more commentary in it and stuff.
Yeah,
but
me too.
So I want to go back and talk a little bit about the box office. So let's go back to 1985 for a minute. I always ask this question up front. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you do your research, you should know what's coming. Mm-hmm. Number one movie at the box office in 1985, Derek. Any guesses?
I got to think it's Back to the Future.
It was Back to the Future. Yeah, that was number one. Beverly Hills Cop was number two.
Oh, I thought that was number four. It was 1984 with Beverly Hills Cop. Okay.
Well, it came out on December the 5th of 1984. So it made most of its money in 1985.
Okay.
Rambo First Blood Part 2 was number 3. Rocky 4, number 4. And Cocoon was number 5.
Oh, interesting.
Rounding out the top 10, then there was Witness, The Goonies, Police Academy 2, their first assignment, was number 8.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Fletch was number 9. And A View to a Kill was number 10, which just...
That's a pretty solid list. It's a good 80s cross-section there.
Not bad. You should see what just fell out of the top 10 was National Lampoon's European Vacation, Mask, The Breakfast Club, and Pee-wee's Big Adventure was in 15th, but Brewster's Millions was in 16th place. So
that's pretty respectable.
Yeah, so it came pretty close. Made just over $40 million. So just a couple things about it. It was released in the U.S. on May the 22nd, 1985, directed by Walter Hill. The screenplay was by Timothy Harris and Herschel Weingrod. Now, they had just come off writing 1983's Trading Places together. Mm-hmm. And it's based on George Barr McCutcheon's 1902 novel of the same name, Brewster's Millions. And before this movie was released, there were 8 different versions of this story.
I read that there have been a lot of remakes in numerous languages, and they had to keep changing the amount of money that he had to spend to make it more appropriate for the time frame of the movie.
The first one ever was in 1914. It was done by Cecil B. DeMille.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
Good company.
Yeah, and then it was made in it was also remade Brewster's Millions in 1921. It was remade in 1926 and 35, 45. And, you know, it changed its name over the years. There was one called Three on a Spree in 61. And then Brewster's Millions finally in 1985. A few more other versions came out after this one, but they were all foreign films.
Yeah, that's what I read. Now, yeah. I don't want to answer this yet because I want to talk about the movie, but I want to circle back when we're sort of getting near the end to talk about what we would have to change to remake this today. So just park that one for now, and we'll come back and discuss that later.
Okay, that's a good point. The director was Walter Hill, and this was his only comedy that he did. He's known mostly for like The Warriors from 79 and 48 Hours from 82.
Yeah.
And this movie, I think. Other than that, I don't know, he wasn't really well known for a lot of their stuff.
Well, and I'm looking at his IMDb, and he was a producer on, it looks like, just about every Alien movie that came out. So,
yes,
I mean, he's certainly made some good bank over the years. He's clearly been attached to some very profitable films. Wow, he's got 27 directing credits. Good for him.
And funny enough that you mentioned about being profitable, because, you know, he's on record as saying he made this movie for one reason and one reason only, and that was for the paycheck. He made this movie just to make money. That was it. Like, he didn't really, I don't think he really believed in the film all that much. And critically, it was pretty much mostly panned by most critics at the time.
Well, but so many comedies always are. Yeah. Even back in the 80s, there was a lot of comedies that got panned when it's like, yeah, it's not going to win any Oscars, but I'm not going to a movie like this expecting, you know, the performance of the career from Richard Pryor, John Candy. I want to go in and have some laughs, and this movie had some good laughs.
But it hasn't held up well for a lot of people.
There were definitely some issues, yeah.
Because it's got a 38% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 37 on Metacritic. So it obviously isn't well remembered, you know.
I think that's more it, yeah. I think that's definitely part of it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are just racist. And they're like, I don't like Richard Pryor. I don't like his politics. I didn't like his stand-up. Oh, he was in this movie. Thumbs down. It's like, come on.
Well, let's talk about the cast, and we'll start with Richard Pryor. Obviously, probably one of the top 2 stand-up comics of all times.
Oh, no question. And a trailblazer for so many reasons. Not only because he's a person of color, but I mean, just the idea of being able to say what you want. You know, he always gets chastised for being dirty, and he was a filthy comic, and he said all these things. And it's like, you know what? Someone needed to do it, and he was among the first, and he did it in such a great way that, you know, it worked. It was controversial at the time, and you know, back then you made your bones as a stand-up comedian. You put out comedy records, right? Like Richard Pryor's got to have some of the best-selling comedy records ever. And then you look at the people that came after him that cite him as their biggest influence. Like Eddie Murphy for years went on and on about how Richard Pryor was one of his great influences. And it's like, yeah, like, look, you know, one guy has to be the first. He has to be the guy to break down the door. He has to be the guy to put up with all the crap and deal with all that hardship. But then look at how it trailblazes for the people that come after it. So, you know, you have to applaud him for doing that.
Yeah, and I think if you made a list of the top comedians of all time, like stand-up comedians of all time, it would probably come down to him and George Carlin, you know, for like 1 and 2. Pryor was known for foul language, and he's also known for his drug use.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, his drug use was so bad. Mel Brooks wanted him to play the lead role of the sheriff in Blazing Saddles, and they couldn't get insurance for him because he was notorious for just not showing up. So the studio wouldn't finance the film. So Mel Brooks had to cast someone else. Cleavon Little obviously got the part, but it's too bad because, you know, like him and Gene Wilder would have done so good together. They did go on to work together in films like Silver Streak and Stir Crazy and See No Evil, Hear No Evil. But what did you think of Richard Pryor overall? Like, are you a big fan of his work in films, especially, and even in this movie?
Oh, well, definitely yes, but I'm not that well versed in his thing. Like, he was a little before my time, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was I was born in the mid 70s, so it's like I'm seeing movies in the 80s. Like when this movie came out, I would have been 10 years old. So I definitely didn't see it in the theater. I absolutely would have seen it on home video a few years after the fact. And so that was sort of my introduction to Richard Pryor, was sort of the things that were later in his career, which a lot of people, like a lot of the criticisms you have of his later movies is that it's like it wasn't as edgy. He was trying to play for more of a PG audience. You know, he toned it down for mainstream America to cash in a check. And hey, that's fair. Like as a kid, I remember seeing him in Superman 3, and that was probably the first place I ever saw him, because that was obviously a movie I saw in the theater. Yeah, I'm kind of afraid to go back and watch Superman 3 now to see just how bad the movie probably is and how terrible he probably is in it. But again, if he's cashing a check, who cares? But no, for the movies, his older movies that I've seen, I've really enjoyed. Like Stir Crazy, I really enjoy. This one I really enjoy. And he did a lot of movies where he was in smaller parts through like the late 70s, early 80s. And so it was always nice to see him popping up here and there. But like some of his most critically acclaimed stuff, like oh my God, what's Lady Sings the Blues? Like I haven't seen that. I know The Mac has a big cult following. Again, I haven't seen that. Like I'm aware of these movies, but I haven't seen any of them.
So I'm a little bit older than you, so I can speak to Richard Pryor a little bit better. One of the things was when he was doing his stand-up, Lorne Michaels wanted him to be a guest host on the first season of Saturday Night Live, and NBC was having none of it. They were like, there's no way you're putting Richard Pryor on live TV, because they thought he'd say the F word, right?
He probably would have.
Yeah, he might have. But I mean, Michaels finally convinced NBC to allow Pryor to be on their show. But the studio put a 7-second delay in place. I think. Right,
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
If Lorne Michaels would have probably known at the time, probably would have resigned. Like, but I'm glad that Richard Pryor made it on the show, because his sketches were among the best in the
with
history.
Chevy Chase?
Oh my God.
Word association.
The word association job interview
ones.
And the Samurai Hotel and the Exorcist and stuff. Oh God, so good. But, like you mentioned, like he went through a period where he tried to appeal to more of a PG audience.
Yeah.
Movies like this one and Superman 3, like you mentioned, The Toy was another one.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing that too when I was younger. Again, and for the slapsticky parts of it, I laughed at because I was young and I thought it was funny. But I remember going back and watching that years later and going, "That's what this movie was about." But as a little kid, I didn't know.
Yeah, I feel like he never really found his true groove in movies. His stand-up, legendary, like game-changing stand-up, but overall, I feel like he never really found his groove in Hollywood films, and I felt as I watched this one, he's pretty toned down in it, for him.
Yes.
And apparently his drug use was pretty subdued during the production of this film, and he used to always say he thought he was funnier when he was using drugs. So, no doubt about it. I think his performance was a bit subdued here.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely seemed to be. I mean, I think it worked for the movie, for the role they had him in. But yeah, like you said, I've seen him I've seen a lot of his stand up, and now that you bring up the Saturday Night Live thing, like I think if that was the energy level that was brought to this, it probably wouldn't have worked as well.
And John Candy, we got to talk about, because like you, I almost forgot he was in it. And then I'm watching like, oh my God, that's right. And apparently Richard Pryor didn't like John Candy at all when they were making this movie.
I sort of got that impression when I was watching it. I'm like, they don't seem like they were obviously both performers, but yeah, I didn't really get that sense of these guys hang out off set.
Yeah, I'm not sure why anyone wouldn't like John Candy. Like, I mean, I get it. Every actor is not the same on screen as in real life. I mean, that's why they're actors, right? But it's hard to imagine why you wouldn't like John Candy. Like, everyone seemed to like working with the guy.
Other than Richard Pryor, I can't think of anybody else who's on record of going like, I hate John Candy. He was awful. It's quite the opposite. It's like everyone always talked about how great he was and how much they liked to be around him. So I don't know. Maybe they just had a private beef that never was made public. Who the hell knows?
I don't know. I mean, he obviously left us way too soon. In 1994, he died of a heart attack. He's only 43 years old. So I've mentioned him before on the show. And, the thing for me is that, like, for such a lovable guy, John Candy always brought a bit of an edge to his parts. But again, I thought, kind of like Pryor, he was a little bit subdued here as well. Maybe it had to do with the director. I don't know.
Could have been. Again, it could be like we were saying, if you're trying to make it for a more PG audience. I don't remember. Was this movie rated PG?
It was.
There was no nudity. There was very little swearing,
yeah.
if any. So that could have been it too, right? Where they were like, look, guys, we need to make this appeal to a broad audience, so you need to take your usual energy and tone it down. So, I mean, I don't know if that was the case, but I sort of got that impression as I was watching.
Yeah, like I say, it's probably on the director, on Walter Hill. I mean, he's not exactly known for his sense of humor.
Yeah, no kidding.
Maybe he struggled to get good performances out of the actors. Like maybe he didn't let them improvise enough or something. Like who knows? But
that's possible. Yeah.
What do you think of John Candy here, maybe versus his other movies, though?
I liked him, but I think I liked the character more than I liked the performance. Not that I disliked the performance, but I just, as I was watching it, I liked what his character was bringing to the story more than I think. And in my mind, I was sort of thinking, it's great this is John Candy, but this probably could have been anyone.
Mm-hmm. The summer of 1985 was a big one for John Candy, too, because he was in Summer Rental, which was the first movie that he was allowed to be the lead. He was in Volunteers. He was in this. And he also had a cameo in Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird. 4 films.
Wow.
In the summer of 85. Pretty good. Let's talk a little bit about Lonette McKee. She was Angela Drake, the accountant.
Right, Miss Drake, the paralegal, yeah.
So before this, she was in The Cotton Club, and she was in Which Way Is Up, also with Richard Pryor. Mm-hmm. But, sort of going into this movie, she was in Showboat on Broadway. That was like a huge role for her. She was nominated for a Tony. She played Julie Laverne, Sweetheart of the South. Mm-hmm. I know you're not a big theater guy like I am.
I saw the original movie of Showboat from way back when. I had to watch it for a film class. That's my familiarity with that particular.
Oh, nice. So she did that on Broadway, but then her Hollywood career never really materialized. Like after she did this movie, she was in a few other movies. She was in Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, and she was in Honey. She was Jessica Alba's mom in that movie. No. Okay. But for the role of Angela Drake, the filmmakers wanted Jennifer Beals. She was like hot because she was just in Flashdance at the time. But obviously it went to Lonette McKee.
I think she would have upstaged Richard Pryor, given what she had recently been in. Like her fame off screen probably would have taken away from the fact that the character of Miss Drake was not supposed to be the lead. Like she was supposed to be a supporting performer. But it's just my thought.
Yeah, but I mean, Jennifer Beals is also kind of a low key kind of actress. I don't know. Sure. I mean, I thought Lonette McKee was okay in this role, but I thought there was zero chemistry between her and Richard Pryor.
Yeah, I never. Towards the end of the movie, when she leaves the room and then he says, "I love you," and I'm thinking, really? Mm-hmm. Like her? Okay.
Although I don't think I can think of a single example where Richard Pryor had any chemistry with his female lead. Because if you look at like Bustin' Loose with Cicely Tyson, or even Some Kind of Hero with Margot Kidder, he just never really had any chemistry with his female leads. So I don't know.
I haven't seen enough of his work where he's supposed to be in a romantic relationship to really say one way or the other. But again, you got to remember, he's a stand-up comedian who is given an opportunity to act. And he's doing a reasonable job, but what we often see when stand-up comedians move into a movie role, unless they're playing a version of themselves, they're pretty outclassed by the people around them. And sometimes you need to do that. You need to bring on a lot of talented people around them to elevate it. But I always just got the sense that it's like, here's a guy who's tremendously funny and is made his bones as a stand-up comedian, and it's like, well, how does everybody profit off of that? Let's put him in a movie. Maybe not the greatest actor, but sure. I mean, I still enjoyed it.
Another guy I forgot that was in this movie until you mentioned him at the end of the last show was Jerry Orbach.
Yeah, as the coach.
He was the manager of the Hackensack Bulls, probably best known as Lenny Briscoe on Law and Order back in the 90s. He was Jennifer Grey's dad in Dirty Dancing.
He was Baby's dad in Dirty Dancing, yeah.
Yeah, he's good. He was. I thought he was really good. He was very, very unique actor. Like, didn't have sort of like that sort of leading man good looks and stuff like that. But I thought
wasn't he one of the voices of in one of the Disney cartoons? He was like doing the one with was it Beauty and the Beast, where all the teapots and stuff were singing, and I think he's one of the voices for one of the animated objects in Beauty and the Beast.
I'm not sure. It wouldn't surprise me because
Candlestick, maybe. I don't know.
Could be because he started doing a lot of Broadway stuff where he did actually musicals. So
yeah,
when he got started.
no, he's like a song and dance man. Yeah.
Couple of small cameos I want to call out: Rick Moranis, Morty King, King of the Mimics. I'm like an Xerox machine. Like I thought he was pretty funny. He's good in anything. And Hume Cronin, who played the long lost rich uncle Rupert Horn.
Right.
I remember him best from Cocoon, where he was with his wife Jessica Tandy.
Yeah.
So this guy got started in theater like way back. He won a Tony Award for Hamlet. And then he got into film doing like early Hitchcock films and stuff. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in 1944 for The Seventh Cross. And perhaps best of all, he's Canadian.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, born in London, Ontario. Went to Ridley College in St. Catharines. And then he went on to McGill. And he has his name on Canada's Walk of Fame down on King Street, Toronto.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. So another guy I want to mention, the photographer.
Yes.
The actor's name is Joe Grafassi. He's done a bunch of small parts over the years, but my personal favorite
so many
is The Naked Gun. You remember? He was the hoodlum down at the docks, and then Drebin asked him a question, and he's like, I don't remember. He goes like, my memory's kind of foggy. And Drebin's like, maybe this will refresh your memory. And gives him a 20. And he's like, well, why do you want to know? And Drebin's like, why should I tell you? And then Grafassi's like, maybe this will refresh your memory. And they like pass a $20 bill back and forth. So, and then he's like, at one point he's like, can you spot me a 20? So I love that scene in Naked Gun. So I recognized him right away. I remembered him from that. But another guy.
I recognize him just as like a character actor. I've seen him in tons of stuff.
Tons of stuff.
Like I couldn't pick any one thing, but he's one of those guys where you're like, oh my God, I recognize that guy from what? I don't know, 50 things I can't remember.
I want to give a shout out also to Peter Jason, Chuck Fleming from Action News, because he was also in 48 Hours, also directed by Walter Hill. He was the bartender of the bar where Eddie Murphy pretends to be the cop.
Right.
And I mentioned him when we did our review of They Live. I was like, hey, that was Chuck Fleming from Action News. So I want to give him a shout out. So let's talk a bit about the plot of the film. Obviously, Richard Pryor is Montgomery Brewster, and he gets this inheritance from a rich uncle, but he gets a choice. So he can take $1 million and walk away, or he has to spend $30 million in 30 days with nothing to show for it. And then he can inherit the full $300 million. And of course, the catch is can't tell anyone what he's doing.
Yeah.
So of course, like everybody can't believe, like he starts like wasting his money. You know, they think it's just sort of gone to his head. He's being foolish. So I want to ask you, Derek, you're given the same offer.
Yeah.
What do? You take the $1 million, or do you go for the $300 million? Deal or no deal?
Oh, of course I take the 30 million. Especially in today's day and age, I think it would be even easier to spend the 30 million.
No, but in today's day, this is $1985. So in today's world, it'd be more like $3 million and walk away, or you get a chance at inheriting $900 million, but you have to spend $90 million in 30 days.
Yeah, and this is what I was saying earlier. Like I think this is how we need to discuss. Like if it happened today, if you were to make this movie today, what would the dollars have to be? Because the whole idea was that spending the $30 million in 30 days was supposed to make them hate money, hate spending, hate the ruthless, reckless, wasteful spending. And, you know, you watch it today and you think, well, 30 million doesn't go as far today as it did all those years ago. So, yeah, like how much would you have to spend every day? Like, so, yeah, to your question, would it be spend 3 million every day for 30 days? Or would you have to do it for a longer period of time? $1 million a day for 90 days? Like, I don't know. It's an interesting sort of conundrum, but I would absolutely take it because even like, as you could see in the movie, like you could see the wheels turning. He was trying to throw his money at things he thought would fail. And of course, from time to time, they didn't. He was allowed to gamble a certain amount away. He was allowed to give a certain amount away to charity. But then like he came up with other creative ways to lose money by, ultimately by running for office, but by the thing like buying the stamp. And as I'm watching, I just kept thinking like, what would I do? And I'm trying to come up with ways where I would be able to buy something and then not have an asset for it. And I think they touch on in this movie, like he rents and leases everything. And I think that's your real key to doing it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. I'd probably just take the $3 million and say, see ya. But again, there'd be no movie, I guess. So
true. And again, in real life, you have kids and I don't. So I mean, you got more to risk, right? More to lose. Could you imagine having the option of taking the million or 3 million and walking away, or going for the gusto and then not having anything if you failed? Like, ooh, that would suck.
So a couple of scenes in this movie I want to talk about that I liked. So the scene when he's in his like hotel room and all the grifters are just like coming at him. And all the guys that are trying to grift him, Rick Moranis we mentioned, but especially Archie Hahn. He was Iceberg Man.
Yeah.
He's like sticks the flag in it and puts the motor in. John Candy's like, that thing melts and he knows it. That part made me laugh. I thought it was pretty funny. Another scene that stood out to me, I could, again, going back to what I said about John Candy, having that edge to him. When he's the catcher and they play the New York Yankees.
Oh my God, yeah.
He says to the batter, he's like, oh, it's such a pleasure to be on the same field as you, Mr. Dixon. I saw you on TV back in that game in Boston. I saw your wife too. She sure is an ugly I was like, oh my God. I just couldn't believe it. It was so, again, the guy's like, couldn't fight him. He's like, get off the field.
But then the best part was 2 minutes later, the next batter comes up and he says, that batter says the same thing. When Candy's like, come on, you've seen his wife. And he says the exact same thing.
Yeah, he's like,
that made it even
ugly It's so funny. Yeah, so that part really made me laugh. Like, I thought that was pretty. It
reminded me a little of Major League, right? It's like, if you're gonna make a baseball comedy, like, that to me was the interaction between the players, where the fans never get to hear what's being said. Like, that's where you can have some comedy gold. So I kind of again, I didn't remember that, but I kind of expected that's where that was gonna go. And when it did, I was very pleasantly surprised. Oh yeah, I was like, that's where this is. I'm
glad you mentioned the part when he mails that stamp, because I thought that was pretty good too. He buys that inverted Jenny stamp, where the upside down airplane, and because he wasn't allowed to destroy anything that he buys, but the post office, by putting the cancellation mark on the stamp, makes it worthless to collectors, which I thought was pretty cool too. Yeah. Another thing I made a note of was the scene where the guy rear ends them, and then you notice it's Montgomery Brewster, and so like he fakes he's like losing feeling in his legs. That was Conrad Janis. And again, who's that?
That's that guy who I recognized and went, oh, I recognize that guy from 20 Things that I can't specifically call any of them to mind right away.
I'll tell you what it is. He was Mindy's dad on Mork and Mindy.
That's where I recognize.
Yes.
Thank you.
In the music store. Yes.
Yes.
So he stood out to me. Also the courtroom scene at the beginning, when they go into the court and the judge is like, so you were making advances on a woman who is clearly engaged to another man? And John Candy says, well, if you don't make any calls, you don't make any sales.
Yeah.
And Richard Pryor's like, he does not represent me. Yeah. And then Candy's like, I just strike that from the record. He's like, John Candy was so funny. And then before that, the scene in the bar, probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. They're trying to pick up the girls. Mm-hmm. And John Candy's like, we were reading in a medical journal that was left in the locker room. It was this Oriental doctor, and he said, we here in the West give a massage with our clothes on, but all the energy gets trapped in the fabric. So, his theory, it's just a theory, is if you get a massage nude, it's better for you. And Pryor's like, the four of us nude would be great. And then the girl looks at John Candy, and she's like, this one's especially cute. I don't know why. That whole scene I thought was pretty funny. So, any other scenes that sort of jumped out to you or that you enjoyed?
I just liked the scenes where he's just like being ridiculously crazy with his money. Always sort of brought a smile to my face. You already talked about like when he says, come on down, whether you've been turned away 100 times, come on down. Well, I want to hear your crazy pitch. And then just the ridiculous thing, and the whole thing with like setting up the match between the baseball teams, where it was he had them take a bus to the airport and then helicopters to the pier and then back on a bus back to the airport, and it's just like everyone around him is just like, you are crazy. Whereas obviously we, the audience, are in on the, not the joke, but we're in on the thing, right? We know he's just trying to be as wasteful as possible. So it was just those scenes where you see him just going overboard with the money. Actually, I like right at the very beginning when he goes to the bank and he hires all the security guards, and then he goes out and the taxi driver, Yakov Smirnoff, comes up and he hires him. And it's like just this whole bit where it's like he's come into this money and he's trying to just like, how can I get rid of a whole bunch very, very quickly? And, it's funny, but at the same time, you're like, oh, I see where he's going with this. So.
Yeah, because it was more than a comedy, really. Well, I thought of it as a comedy, but as I'm watching it this time, I'm like, there's a few other dramatic elements in it,
Yeah, and that was where I wanted to sort of cycle to next was that was what I really got out of it this time was things like the relationship with John Candy's character. So, when Monty inherits all this money and starts just spending it frivolously, all of these strangers, just attach themselves to him. They see him throwing money around frivolously and offering up all these things, and they immediately think here is both figuratively and literally a free lunch. And they're constantly around him. They're just using him for his money, and which he wants, right? He wants to be spending frivolously, but John Candy never really seemed to be in that same mindset. He just kept saying, I'm his best friend. I'm his best friend. Everything was always, we're going to do this together. He's always looking out for, he's the guy who brings in the financial advisor. He's the guy who
gets the $10 million.
Yeah, $10 million. Yeah, like he's always like, he's not trying to take advantage of the fact that his friend has inherited all this money. He just genuinely still wants to be his friend. And then at the end, he's the one who passes the hat, and he has that speech with him where, he says, he's like, look, I just want to say, I haven't spent any of the money you've given me. I've got it. Let's just buy a car and drive across the country and get a cabin. And again, it's always like it's the emphasis of, you're my friend. You were my friend before you had money. You were my friend when you inherited all this money, and you're my friend now that you've lost all this money. And I just want to spend time with you. You're my friend. And that really spoke to me. Maybe that's just because I'm getting older, but and it's like my social circle is getting smaller and smaller as I get older and older, and people get on with their lives. But that really struck me, just that idea that you know who your friends are. Your genuine friends, they're a lot easier to spot than the Johnny come latelys and the people who are just there to take advantage of you. So that sort of theme was something that really jumped out at me this time around.
I definitely agree with you. Like, there's a lot of themes going on in this film. Friendship was one of them, but greed was another.
Oh,
and
no kidding.
The American dream. We've mentioned this multiple times on the podcast. So many of these films are like about the American dream. We're like a twisted version of the American dream. But one thing that I did make a note of was I as much as I did enjoy the film, but I felt that the movie bogs down a bit during the election campaign stuff.
Yeah, a little bit.
And especially even when he loses and stuff. I don't know. I felt like the movie just kind of slowed down the pace and stuff. And so that really, really stood out to me this time. I don't know.
The other sort of theme that really jumped out at me this time was the idea of honesty versus secrecy, and how he has to keep this secret about why he's doing what he's doing, despite the fact that he is very clearly aware of how others are perceiving his behavior. And at first, he just starts saying to people like with the baseball coach, he goes, you might think I'm nuts, and what I do may sound like I'm nuts, but I'm not nuts. Just go with it and enjoy it, kind of thing. And then much later, he stops saying, don't think I'm crazy, and starts saying, don't think of me as an asshole. I'm not trying to be an asshole, even though I know that's what people think. And it's like he realizes, like he's very, very clearly realizes how his actions and his behavior are being perceived by those around him. But he has to act like he doesn't. He has to act oblivious, because that's part of keeping up the subterfuge and this illusion of what's happening, to keep this secrecy. And so just this idea of how difficult it must be to have to keep a secret that big, knowing how it's affecting your relationship with people. And that was sort of how I ended up getting around to the John Candy thing, is despite all of that, John Candy continued to be his friend and continued to try and help him. Whereas other people, like the lawyer, what's her name, Miss Drake, at first, she's very just, I'm going to be neutral. I've been hired to do this for 30 days to be your bookkeeper. And it doesn't take her long to sort of form an opinion and just think, like, this guy is being wasteful. He's got this money. He's doing stupid and terrible things with it. You could be doing so much more with it to help people, and it's like she has this very negative opinion of him, and you can see how it's upsetting him that he can't really do anything about it until the 30 days are up. But by then, it could be too late. So it's like, oh no. But just this idea of the honesty versus the secrecy was, again, I thought it was a lot more. There was a lot more going on with that. Like, obviously, it's very much in the surface. It's very much in your face. That's the whole point of the movie, is that he can't tell anyone. But I think I was watching with a little bit more of a critical eye this time, and I really started to pick up on a lot more of the nuances around that.
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, it was a lot more than a comedy. So do you want to give it a rating out of 10?
I'd probably give it a 7. It was good. It wasn't great. I would watch it again, but not immediately. And I would definitely recommend it to someone who hasn't seen it before. Maybe not someone youngish, because I think, like you said, there's some parts, especially in the sort of the third act, where it starts to slow down. I think a younger audience might lose attention, stop paying attention, and start pulling out their phone, and it's like, well, that's when you lose them. But yeah, I think 7 sounds about right for me.
I'm on board with you 100%. I had written down 7 as well for this. Yeah. We're both much higher than Rotten Tomatoes and stuff, but I thought it was quite good. Not great, not one of the best 80s films, but and I didn't have a ton of nostalgia for it. I don't know why. I guess I didn't watch it a lot back in the day. I feel like I watched it more than once, but
same. It's like I didn't really have a strong fondness to it like I do with some of the other movies that we watch. Right. It's like, oh, this goes back to when I watched it 30 times as a kid. Like, I think this was maybe the 4th time I've watched this movie in my life, which for a movie from the 80s, that's a big surprise. If it's something that you think, oh, well, if you like it that much, why you only watched it that few times? Whereas, like, I was listening to a podcast this week, they were talking about Back to the Future, and I'm thinking in my head, I've probably seen that movie 100 times. Right. Like, literally 100 times. And I'll watch it as soon as we're done recording this podcast.
I'd watch it 100 more.
Yeah, like, it's just, arguably it's close to a perfect movie as you're going to get. It's really good. Brewster's Millions, not nearly in that class, but no, I enjoyed it, and I would recommend it.
Yep, I agree with you. So yeah, I'd give it the same rating. All right, on that note, what do you say we have some
fun with Caveman?
Okay, Derek, it's time once again to play a version of a game that we like to call Pick the Flick. Yeah, pick the flick. You get the synopsis, then pick the flick. You get the year, pick the flick. So this one, we always have a common theme. So the common theme this time is all the titles have either denominations of money or the word money in the title. So it's a little bit challenging this week.
Yeah, okay.
So it could be a denomination of money or the word money itself is in the title. Okay? I'm going to give you the year and the synopsis. You give me the title of the film. Okay?
All right, I'll try.
2004, Frankie, an ill-tempered old coach, reluctantly agrees to train aspiring boxer Maggie. Impressed with her determination and talent, he helps her become the best, and the two soon form a close bond.
Was that $1 Million Baby?
Sure was. Okay, 2011. Oakland A's general manager Billy Beane's successful attempt to assemble a baseball team on a lean budget by employing computer-generated analysis to acquire new players.
That would be Moneyball.
You're doing really well. You're going to do good. Okay, this one's a TV show.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and a TV show that ran from 1974 to 1978. The synopsis is, after a severely injured test pilot is rebuilt with nuclear-powered bionic limbs and implants, he serves as an intelligence agent.
Yeah, this is TV's Lee Majors. This is the $6 Million Man.
Of course. Okay, 1986. Fast Eddie Felson teaches a cocky but immensely talented protege the ropes of pool hustling, which in turn inspires him to make an unlikely comeback.
Sorry, what was the year?
1986.
Oh, it was a sequel. I was like, well, that's The Hustler, but that's not Money. No, it was The Color of Money.
Yes, that's right. The sequel to Hustler. Okay, we're going to go back. 1964. A wandering gunfighter plays two rival families against each other in a town torn apart by greed, pride, and revenge.
Was that A Fistful of Dollars?
Clint Eastwood, directed by Sergio Leone, the ultimate spaghetti western right there. All right, 1965. Two bounty hunters with the same intentions team up to track down a gang of outlaws led by a psychotic Mexican bandit who is plotting an audacious bank robbery.
Well, that was a sequel, and it was called... I'm not sure if I got the exact title. I think it was called For a Few Dollars More.
Yep, and it was a sequel the next year. Okay, 1986. A young couple struggles to repair a hopelessly dilapidated house.
Never saw it, but I believe it was called The Money Pit.
All right, we're going to venture back into TV. This is an easy one for you.
Okay.
1985 to 1988. There's been newer versions, but they all suck. Okay. Two teams, each with one celebrity guest and one contestant, play two games where, through 6 categories, the winner of each game goes to the winner's circle for a chance to win the grand prize.
Well, there were numerous iterations, but I think that was the $100,000 pyramid.
Yes, and we play it here on the show all the time.
Yeah.
You're kicking butt. Okay, 1981. During the Great Depression, a sheet music salesman seeks to escape his dreary life through popular music and a love affair with an innocent school teacher.
Wow. That doesn't... What was the year? 81?
1981. It's a bit of a tougher one.
Doesn't sound familiar at all. I have no clue.
It was Steve Martin, Pennies from Heaven.
Oh, sure. Never heard of it.
Him and Bernadette Peters. No, you don't know that one? Okay.
No, I don't know that at all.
All right, 1982, another tough one. A fan club of diehard James Dean fans meet on the 20th anniversary of his death and reconnect, opening old wounds and facing new ones.
Huh. I'm going to take a wild guess. I have no idea if this is even a real movie. I'm going to say it was a Five and Dime. No? Am I close?
It's close. Come back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean.
Wow. Oh, man. I don't know why Five and Dime sort of jumped into my head. I thought, what's like an old-timey something?
I think it was Cher's first film, and she was great in it. And people were like, oh, my God, Cher can really act. So... I'll tell you what, I'll give you a bonus question. It's kind of a trick question, but I'll give you a bonus question.
Is it a Fargan trick question?
It's a Fargan trick question, you ice hole. All right, 2002. Bounty hunter Bucum chases bail jumper Reggie, who runs right into the scene of a diamond heist and murder and gets shot at as well. Later, they become partners in their pursuit of the $20 million in diamonds and lottery ticket that their women join.
Wow. That doesn't sound familiar at all.
All about the Benjamins. Because the Benjamins refers to the Benjamin Franklin on the $100 bill.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a trick question. So, that was a tough one. That's for
just never heard of them. I've heard of the movie, but I had no idea what it was about.
All right, so we last time I reviewed a movie, and this time we reviewed a movie. So next time we're going to do a topic. So I don't know. We don't have anything really planned, but do you think we should do anything special next time out?
Well, I've been chatting with a friend of the show who's made some previous appearances, and if things come together, we may have a third for our show next week. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed for that, and if not, it'll just be back to you and I for our usual shtick.
Well, let's hope we can convince this person to come back on the show again, because that would be great. And if not, it's just me and you again next week. So until then, I'm Chris McBrien, you're Derek Myers, and we both want to say thanks a lot for taking time to listen to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.